lovely. Many parts of the country are waking up to a beautiful day, but there's thunderstorm warnings. There's all sorts. It's just that typical spring weather, which attacks. But you know what? Glass half full. Good for the garden. Now, in life and especially at work, it's really important to have a bit of self-confidence. So joining me to tell me more about how you can get that self-confidence is Harold Hillman, executive leadership coach, business commentator, author, so many things. Morning to you, Harold.
Good morning, Mel. It's beautiful right now in Auckland, isn't it?
It certainly is. So, we'll take something from the weather, considering, there's nowhere else that we're actually going at the moment. So let's talk self-confidence. It's something we would all like to have more of, really, isn't it?
It makes a big difference to certainly the quality of life that you live, but also the impact that you have, no matter what your profession is. And people who are described as self-confident, they just do better in life on many metrics. They are seen as stronger leaders in business and politics. They perform better as athletes and entertainers, and there's just a health factor also associated with self-confidence, Mel, in that sense that optimism correlates with a positive energy, a high self-esteem, which is just a healthier way to be in terms of confidence. Mm-hmm. And so it makes a huge difference in the impact that people want to have in their life.
So how do we define self-confidence? I mean, what are some of the common traits and behaviours that we're likely to see in someone that we consider to be self-confident?
Yeah, you could see it it tends to kick in early, so there's a correlation around a confident 6-year-old kid and how that kid grows up. And a lot of that just has to do with the affirmation that we give to our kids when they are certainly preteens, but during their teenage years as well. There's a direct correlation between the sense of affirmation and hearing what you do well and feeling really confident about yourself. Self-confident people also push through ambiguity and uncertainty quicker. So there's a tendency to accept staunch reality quickly and then to start to push into it as opposed to going into a sense of denial or withdrawing and those types of things. Self-confident people also inspire confidence in others. There is an energy associated with a person who is confident about being able to push through an obstacle, a barrier, something that's in their way. Self-confident people also think big, Mel. We've talked about this before around that whole notion of optimism. And so when a person is optimistic, they think in terms of what's possible, versus a person who's a pessimist who will often think in terms of what's probable. It's almost, I use the analogy of driving a car, and a person who is self-confident has their foot on the accelerator with that optimism, whereas a person who's a pessimist tends to be tapping the brake, that type of a thing. So there is an energy factor there. And then there's self-confident people are just usually good at what they do. They just ooze credibility because they can back their talk with their walk, playing to their strengths. Some people are wired for different things, whether it be singing or on an athletic field or around a particular specialty. We call that aptitude when we do leadership assessments. And that is, some people are wired numerically, some people are wired verbally, some people are wired, we call it diagrammatically, in that sense of being able to see the system. So the idea is play to your strengths. If you want to convey confidence, play to your strengths.
Are there any deeper psychological issues for a person who has low self-confidence? I mean, does it lead on to bigger problems?
It does, Mel. It does. And again, this starts early in life. And again, the reason why I emphasize to parents to just be mindful of the fact that your kids need a little bit of psychological fuel. And that is to let them know where they really do well. Because there is a correlation between self-confidence, high self-confidence, and what we call high self-esteem. And then also there's a correlation between people who don't feel good about themselves, and it can track with some mental disorders like depression or anxiety. Low self-esteem tends to predispose a person to mental disorder, and so it just kicks in terms of a bit of a vicious loop. It is so important. One of the human needs that Dr. Abraham Maslow, his famous hierarchy of needs, the need for esteem. And people just really need to know, people need to hear more. They need to be affirmed more about how they make a difference, what they do well, and those types of things, as opposed to always focusing on the negative or what someone doesn't do well. Sometimes our energy towards our kids, our partners, our coworkers is often, let me point out a mistake as opposed to pointing out something that you do well. It is so important. It's a human need for esteem, Mel.
So if you want to build your confidence, what are some specific things that you can do?
It's important it really is important to watch the self-talk. You and I have talked before about the voice of the inner critic versus the voice of the inner coach. Those are two voices that are loud in our head. And for some people who have high achievement need, high aspiration, high drive, what we call perfectionists, sometimes the inner critic is louder in our mind. And that inner critic is basically telling you, don't put yourself out there, as opposed to the inner coach, which is that voice that says, go ahead. Ask that question, make that point, stand out. Don't be afraid to do that. So just really watching the self-talk. Do you talk yourself out of situations, or do you talk yourself into situations? That's a huge factor. I mentioned before optimism. It is so important, Mel. It's important to think in terms of what is possible as opposed to probable. And actually, optimism correlates with both mental and physical well-being. In fact, over the age of 45, its influence on your quality of life is massive. And so it really is important to really keep an optimistic frame, particularly as we continue to work our way through this current scenario, this current pandemic. And then I would just say people should be realistic and about goals. There should be some stretch in how we want to grow, but make it reasonable in that sense, again, of there are some things that some people just don't do well, and there's some things that they do well. So move in that direction of what you do well and tend to outsource those things that sometimes can be a bit of a drag factor, Mel.
Sounds good. Hey, Harold Hillman, thank you so much for your time this morning, executive coach, talking about how you can build a little bit of self-confidence, because we all need it at times of our life. You know, even the super confident people have those moments. And at the moment with this pandemic, a lot of us are lacking it.